Hi, good afternoon, everybody. We're just going to give it a minute and allow time for other people to join. For those of you that don't know, it's Wednesday today, halfway through the week, it's always a good sign. What we're going to do is welcome our panelists who are here today, offering a whole load of wisdom and insight into mental health. Hashtag Security Minds Matter. Follow us on LinkedIn. Hope you're having a good day. Okay, so welcome everybody. Thanks for your time in advance. It's great to have you here. This webinar is being recorded. So if you would like a copy of this, just drop us a note in the chat box and we'll make sure that you are on the list to receive that link. We will be sharing it on LinkedIn as well, www.ifpo.uk. So this is the second of the quarterly IFPO webinars. We are absolutely delighted to be here and I'm delighted to host it actually. They say that 2019 is stay away from negative people, 2020 is stay away from positive people, 2021 is stay away from people, but actually I think 2021 is about being brave, having new options and just doing things differently. So here I am, you have me for the next hour. So we're going to invite you to ask questions, drop them in the chat box as well. And that way we can be sure to direct your question to the most appropriate panelist. Okay, so an introduction to IFPO. IFPO is, an organisation that wants to be recognised as the centre of excellence and primary provider of education and training products and services to the security industry. If you want to know more, get in touch. You'll be hearing a little bit more about some of the projects we're involved in a little bit later on. So I'm just going to start off with a little icebreaker. This is what they call the human test. Can you pass the human test? This is a test to see if you're human. Completely stolen and plagiarized from Z Frank, who has this on Instagram. Look out for it. So let's imagine we're in a large conference room. And when you hear something that applies to you, you're going to raise your hand. Imagine you're with lots of people. We're all dying to get there. Number one, have you ever picked your nose in a public place?
Oh, yeah.
And caught someone watching you? Number two, have you ever laughed or smiled when someone said something shitty towards you? And then wondered for the rest of the day why you reacted that way? Have you ever seemed to lose your airplane ticket 1,000 times as you walked from the check-in gate to the departure gate?
Yeah.
Number four, have you ever tried to guess someone else's password so many times that you actually end up locking them out of their account?
Yeah.
Panelists putting their hands up every time here. Have you ever had a nagging feeling that one day you'll be discovered as a fraud? Definitely. Have you ever hoped that there was some ability that hadn't been discovered yet that you're just naturally great at?
Yeah.
Have you ever broken something in real life and found yourself looking for the undo button in real life? Have you ever found yourself smiling like an idiot while texting with someone? Have you ever subsequently texted that person the phrase, "I'm staring at the phone smiling like an idiot"? Have you ever been tempted to and gave in to the temptation of looking through someone else's phone? Have you ever had a conversation with yourself and suddenly realized you're a real arsehole to yourself? Has your phone ever run out of battery halfway through an argument? And it sort of felt like the phone was breaking up with both of you. Have you ever woken up blissfully and suddenly been flooded by the awful remembrance that someone had left you? Have you ever lost the ability to imagine a future without a person? that is no longer in your life? Have you ever looked back on that event with the sad smile of autumn and the realization that futures will happen regardless? Congratulations, you've now completed the test.
I am so human.
You're all human. Look at all the things we have in common. We feel joy the same, we hurt the same. With depression alone being the leading cause of ill health and disability worldwide, can you say with any certainty at all that you won't succumb to significant mental health challenges in the future? Okay, let's introduce our panelists. We've had some of them just along the way there. We've got Paul McGregor, Leanne Stant, Damien McDonough and Becky Heath, and they're just going to introduce themselves for about a minute each so you get to know the gravitas of who we have with us today. Paul, over to you.
Well, thank you for having me. I'll give you the surface level side of Paul first, which is the founder of Every Mind at Work. Every Mind is a business, a mental health partner for organizations, and our biggest client is the Co-op. Our smallest client is a small recruitment company of 3 employees. And our overall mission is to try and normalize mental health conversations in the workplace and to try and change the approach from a reactive one to a more proactive one. And I'm sure we'll talk about it more in this session today, but I've been campaigning for mental health for the past 4 or 5 years, sharing my own personal story, and really grateful for having the opportunity to be here today as well. So that's the surface level version of Paul.
Thank you, Paul, and looking forward to hearing a lot more from you later. Leanne.
Oh, thank you, Paul. Hi, everyone. My name's Leanne Stant, or Lee. I work for an organisation called Talk Out. Our vision is to drive transformation across the globe, and we use a market-leading change development platform in 3 arms, and I look after, along with my brilliant colleague Nat, the educational piece. I've been working in the world of wellbeing and engagement forever, probably about 15 years now, from all different genres of organisation. And like Paul, I am here to drive change, and it's happening. I'm also that person who has to pick their nose on the way home in the car from a flight. So I'm human as well as everything else. Thanks, Yolanda.
Thank you, Leanne. It's great to have you. I'm just going to introduce Damien McDonough, who is also on the board of IFPO and represents our specific Irish contingent. Over to you.
That's great, Yolanda. Thanks very much. So Damien McDonough is my name. I'm a security professional with over 19 years experience within the military and the private sector. I hold a master's in security and risk management from the University of Leicester. I also hold a postgrad cert in healthcare and austere environments from the University of South Wales. I'm currently a member of ACES as well, and the Irish chapter specifically. I'm also a member of the Security Institute, and as Yolanda has kindly said, I'm also a member of IFPO UK and the Irish contingent. So that's really a nutshell for me.
He hasn't also told you he's incredibly good to have at hand if you're in the jungle, but we'll talk about that a little bit later on as well. Becky, over to you.
Hello, I'm Becky Heath. I'm a shared services manager working for ABM. I'm delighted to be here today. Shared service manager is basically I'm in charge of a security team and an environmental services team in a shopping centre. So I've only been in the security industry for 2 years. I worked in retail for 18 years before that as a manager. When I joined the role here, I worked in control, which is the hub of security in a shopping centre. And I've worked my way up through the pandemic to be shared services manager, and learning an awful lot through my very short time here. I've recently become a member of the IFPO, and trying to take it all in daily, really.
Thank you, Becky. That's awesome. Okay, so let's start off. Look, talking about mental health isn't an easy subject, but it's a subject that we're all becoming an awful lot braver to talk about, and not just talk about, but do things that are positive. We know, for example, if we look at the rail industry, that there is an awful lot of controversy around the disruption to business and disruption to human life when a life is lost on the lines. And so therefore, Network Rail, it would be fair to say, have what they call an acceptable standard of death by suicide. and we can easily understand why. So I'm going to go to Paul first. Paul, tell us what you think about there being an acceptable amount of death by suicide.
Big question. I mean, of course, we're all working towards zero suicide, right? I mean, what's the aim if, you know, we can't accept a certain number? However, that's of course very difficult to do, and maybe that's not going to be possible in my generation. But I feel like we all have the ability to set up the next generation and future generations of how they perceive mental health. You know, from my own experience, suicide is something that is so difficult to deal with. The way I explain suicide for a lot of people that are bereaved by suicide is grief with a volume turned up. And I do the work that I do, and I share my story quite openly, because when I was 18, I sadly lost my dad to suicide. And my dad was someone who had no signs of a mental illness, right? Like no warning signs when it happened. And for me, suicide and mental illness was straitjackets, padded cells, and I don't have to worry about that stuff. And when it impacts you, it impacts you. And I struggle to deal with that. I struggle to talk about it. And that's the reality of it. So I think if we're striving towards an attainable goal, zero suicide sounds impossible, but equally, you know, what else are we looking to achieve? So yeah, I think we've all got a personal responsibility to let's talk about it. You know, this session's a great example of that. Let's do all we can to be vulnerable, to show up, and to try and change the culture and the stigma that surrounds mental health, because that will better equip the next generation and the generation after that and the generation after that. You know, I'm still pretty young, I've got kids, but I'm hoping that when I'm a great granddad that I might sit back and say, hold on, the conversation's moved along a little bit here, and you know, we are actually seeing mental health in a very different way. It isn't straitjackets and padded cells anymore. Making people feel alone. So yeah, I mean, I'd love to get to zero suicide, and yeah, I'll do all I can to try and get us there as well.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you for, you know, sharing your vulnerability with us. Leanne, tell us about why, you know, death by suicide shouldn't be tolerated in any sense.
Firstly, Paul, thank you for sharing your story there. It's very brave, and thank you so much. Yeah, and my point, I would just want to reiterate Paul's point, is that there should be zero. And with the education piece, with the fact that people are talking openly now about mental ill health and suicidal ideation, which means suicidal thoughts, as some of our guys will be aware of, the importance now is making sure that we talk openly, and with that there's a conversation, because with suicidal loss there's a ripple effect, as we all know, and it's, as Paul's just beautifully explained there, that was a member of his family. And I am very lucky that I have a family who talk openly about how they feel, particularly my son, who has talked recently about his own struggles. So I think it's important for us to get that foundation set. Let's have that conversation. And eventually, like Paul says, in our lifetime, I'm a lot older than you, Paul, that there will be a massive change to the figure.
Thanks, Leanne.
Thanks, Yolanda.
So, Damien, tell us why, you know, suicide, death by suicide, what they call now successful suicide even, has a huge relevance in your world.
Well, I suppose what I will do, Yolanda, I'll talk about my experience with successful, I suppose, people who successfully terminated their life. A friend of mine, we had a conversation. It was how would you say, not a friend I would have seen every day, but we would have kept in contact maybe once or twice a month. And the friend contacted me on a Monday, you know, was having problems, general chit chat, was saying they were having relationship difficulties. And, you know, you do the friend thing, don't worry about it, everything will be okay. Think of the future, think of your children, you know, you'll get through it. You know, relationships aren't everything. If you need to terminate them and move on, you know, sometimes it's better to move on. And then I suppose for me, then that was it. We said we'll touch base then at the end of the week. And then what I found out was on the Friday then that they had taken their own life. So for me, it was a case of, well, it hits you hard, but then it's like, could I have done anything? What happened? You know, and for me, it was a case of, you know, I need to be a little bit more aware of conversations with people, reaching out, ensuring that the communication piece is open. And, you know, everybody's life is, well, so hectic. Well, not in the last say 12 months with COVID, we've all been stuck at home. But definitely previous to that, our lives have been hectic, and you tend to forget about friendships, and you tend to forget about reaching out and communicating with people. So for me, it's just to really let everyone know that the lines of communication are open. I don't know if that answers your question or not, but that's...
Yeah, a very real story. Thank you very much. So Becky, I did mention to you earlier that I would hate to have on my portfolio a big car park with a very high level. Dealing with, you know, attempted suicide or even successful attempts at suicide is part of your everyday world. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so sadly, you know, working in the security industry nowadays, especially when you work in a shopping centre, it is part and parcel of your job now. Shouldn't be, but it is. Unfortunately, we have had 5 attempts in the last 6 months. Luckily for us, not successful. So my last was a female who was radioed over from control that she was on there was like a bridge that goes over to the road. She was on that. Myself and another member of staff made that. I was first to her location. I called someone else, and we had to physically pull her down as she was about to jump. Unfortunately, she very clearly had bad mental health, and we had to hold her to the ground until the police and ambulance got there. Even when the police got there, they had to cuff her until she was looked after, just purely because if we'd have let go, she'd have got up and jumped again, or attempted to jump again. So I mean, I like I said, we've had 5 attempts in the last 6 months, quite severe attempts as well. It's really sad that we have to now go for the days when a lot of people know someone who is attached to suicide in some way. But I think it's about, like you said, knowing and talking. And I think COVID actually has had a worse impact on it because people feel so alone. Whereas before, yes, we needed to make sure that we were talking to people, but there's so many people out there that just feel like there's no one, even down to the doctors that you can't go and see and everything at the moment. So I think, yeah, we are, as a security in a centre, we are seeing the very, very high impact of that at the moment.
Thank you, Becky. So that really very nicely leads me on to the next question, coming to Paul. And the question is, how would you in your role, and I think you're going to have a lot of things to mention here, they're going to be very helpful, but how would you in your role and your influence reduce the stigma of mental health to encourage people in your organisations to come forward easier, because the stigma still prevents people from openly saying, I have mental health challenges?
Yeah, I think, you know, addressing stigma is very difficult, but a lot of organizations will avoid that. You know, when I work with organizations, I talk a lot about the what and the why. The what is, we have an employee assistance program, we have mental health first aiders. The why is, why are you doing that? What's the culture? What's the strategy? And how are you tackling stigma? You know, just because a manager's done some mental health training does not change the dynamic between the employee and the manager. Like, there's still judgment. There's still, oh, I can't talk about how I feel to my manager because I'm going to be, you know, I'm not going to get that promotion. I'm going to be, you know, fired from my job potentially. So when you're looking at stigma, we have to address that. And equally, as you've said, when it comes to awareness around mental health is increasing. We can all see that. But it doesn't change the fact that if I asked everyone on this call, what's the first association with the word mental that you make in your mind? So if I say to you what the word mental means, to me, my association with the word mental is crazy, right? And that's how I've been educated. That's how I've been brought up. That's what society has conditioned me to believe. So that's still stigma. The fact that I don't want to talk about my mental health because I say that I'm crazy. So I'm not going to talk about it. So I think the only way that we can really start to chip away at the stigma is to try and allow people to be more vulnerable. And vulnerability is something that, of course, we will shy away from. We all put these walls up because we're worried about being shamed, we're worried about being judged. However, we need to try and take those walls down and encourage others to do so as well. And vulnerability, I believe, and people sharing their own personal experience, especially around mental health, encourages a lot of others to talk about their journey. I've walked into construction companies and thought, oh no, what am I doing here? Like, these guys are going to boo me out of this room. And literally by the end of it, I've got a queue of about 30 of them, and all of them are talking about their own story, their own journey of what they've faced and a friend they've lost and all of this. And you know, there I was kind of judging them. So I think vulnerability, more people sharing their own story. And then the final thing that I would say on that point is reframing those statistics. And what I mean by that is, you know, there's a clear statistic that suicide's the biggest killer of men in the UK under 45. Like, more people know about that statistic now, but not many people sit back and actually feel the full brunt of that statistic. And what I mean by that is, I'm a man under 45. Biggest threat to my life as a dad, as a husband, as a son, as a brother, as a colleague is this. It's my own mind. It's mental health. So even though my mind has this way of saying to me that I shouldn't worry about my mental health because it makes me weak, there's also this constant reminder that the biggest threat to me as I sit here today is my own mind. It's mental health. So I think people need to start to realize the importance of mental health. And as we say, understand that struggling with your mental health, it's not weakness, it's just being human, as you kind of pointed out at the beginning of this session, right? So yeah, we've got a long way to go, but I think if we can encourage more people to share their story, and potentially that's someone being vulnerable, I think that would definitely tackle that stigma that surrounds mental health.
Thank you, Paul. Very good to know that you can follow Paul on LinkedIn. He posts some really good stuff around mental health and all of his adventures as well. So do check him out. Coming over to you then, Leanne, you know, let's talk about what you can do in your organisation and influence to reduce the stigma of mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. Paul, everything Paul said, but I can influence personally within my organisation and my team. But I'm a mental health first aid instructor, both adult and youth. And Paul's absolutely right. Having the training is great, but if you haven't got that infrastructure or that ecosystem, then actually you need to do more within the organisation. Some organisations have amazing benefits like breakfast or fruit, you know, for the colleagues. But if you haven't got managers who can have that emotional conversation with their teams, you can keep your breakfast, because actually that doesn't help me at all. It might bring me to an organisation, certainly wouldn't keep me there as regards to how I'm going to be supported within that business. I find, and I have been, I'm just looking at Becky, I am honoured to have worked alongside ABM in the last couple of months, and I'm going to be in the future with the cohorts. And training within the mental health arena, I hope that I create a really open emotional space. So when Paul talks about being vulnerable, lived experience, particularly when you're in a training environment, is crucial, and that really embeds the learning. So I try to share as much of experiences I've been through. And in my 46 years, when I think back, I've been through quite a lot, really, as regards to mental ill health. But also, when we talk about stigma, we talk about dialogue and narrative, and actually the language we use is really important. So when Paul talks about mental being, everyone thinks of like ill health when we think mental. That's still very, very apparent, very true. You know, there's a big difference between mental health, because we all have it, and mental ill health that we have conditions, disorders, or experiences with. So I do think it's about us listening, being present, empathising, compassion more than anything, being kind, but our leaders demonstrating these behaviours, because it's all well and good us all jumping on a training course and learning so much when we've got people above us who aren't taking on board what we're trying to achieve. So it starts at the top quite often, even though the front line are the ones who are most impacted, Yolanda.
Perhaps instead of mental health, it needs to be mind health. You know, because then there isn't the stigma between mental being a negative connotation, but mind is about all things mind.
It's like successful suicide. There shouldn't be the word successful with the term suicide.
No,
you know, it's complete or attempt. It's one or the other.
I was stunned to hear that was a recognised term to be used. Yeah. Okay. So no, you're welcome. Coming over to you, Damien, let's talk about how your passion to influence and reduce the stigma of mental health is working for you.
Well, I don't know whether it's working, but how I would just echo what the previous two panelists have said. And I think the key to making it work is to talk through lived experiences. And I know we've been kind of looking at suicide here as being the main thing, but it's down to anxiety. It's down to dealing with people, dealing with a manager who probably just is in their own lane, focused on their own objectives, and are not taking into account your own personal problems, your own real world issues before you get to the workplace. So what I tend to do for myself is I try to make myself look at things objectively, rather than as the manager or as the person in charge. Try to look at it objectively, and if something is going wrong or somebody is out of character or they're just out of sorts, is to say, right, okay, I need to identify what's the cause of that. Why have they started to act that way? And maybe they don't want to speak to me, but it's identifying a work colleague that they do converse with and asking them, is everything okay there? Am I missing something? Or is there something I should be aware of that they're just not willing to speak to me? Because I could be the issue, you know, as a manager or somebody in charge, I could be the issue. But it's to be aware of that. So what I like to do is just talk through lived experiences and how things made me feel. And I have to say, I'm extremely fortunate. I have a great cohort of work colleagues who we sit down and we hold each other accountable. You know, when we're sitting down and we're talking through lived experiences, and we might be giving out about another colleague and saying, you know, X and Y and this and that. And they go, well, what did you do to add to that? They hold you accountable. So it's kind of like you go, well, I'm here to give out about them. I don't want you telling me that I was wrong as well. You know, but it's good. I have to say, I'm extremely fortunate. I have a great cohort of people who hold me accountable. And yeah, so for me, it's lived experiences, how I feel in the situation. And it's even conversations that can make you bring them home. You're sitting in bed, you're lying awake from a conversation. It's that anxious feeling that it gives you, you know, and then your attitude changes at home. So for me, it's to try and identify it early and within my colleagues in work, you know.
Thank you, Damien. So Becky, as an advocate here for ABM, welcome to IFPO as well as a corporate member. Tell us in your role then how you feel you and your team and your colleagues and your company even can do to sort of influence and reduce the stigma for your employees, maybe reporting in some mental health challenges.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with the other three. A lot of what they've said is exactly the same in my scenario as well. I mean, I'm obviously a manager. I manage team leaders down, and I've found that some of the best ways to deal with stigma is to talk to them real and honest. I often bring myself into a situation. I've had mental health problems in the past, so to talk to them, make them realize that, you know, I've worked through that. They'll always be there, but I know how to work through it, give them ideas, help them. That always helps. But I also think from a sort of like my industry, it's about the training as well. We're huge into, with ABM and just within my centre, we're very big on the training. We put all our security guys through suicide awareness training, so they learn how to talk to people, how to notice the signs. And it's really, really important that they understand what mental health is and how they can help people, even if it's just a small thing that they say to someone, or, you know, a smile at someone in the centre. It can sometimes brighten someone's day if they're just recognised. And it's really important that our guys do that. And then obviously ABM are working really, really closely with Leanne and doing mental health awareness, and we've got people who are going on those courses, and I think they're looking to move that forward. So that's brilliant, you know, where you're fully trained, and I do honestly think it is down to the training and learning how to talk to people and support people.
Thanks, Becky. Well, you mentioned Leanne there. In fact, we're going to come over to Leanne now. Leanne's got a very short presentation to share, and it's all part of our collaborative program in not just walking the walk, but talking the talk, and finding really good solutions and real things that people can do to help feel better and help others feel better. So Leanne, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you so much.
Once you finish, we'll come back to some Q&A from our audience today.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Yolanda. I did remember I was doing this presentation, but I kind of went, whoo, here we go. Can we see that screen, guys? Okay. Can Can you see that presentation? Amazing. Okay, so I've already mentioned the organisation that I'm very lucky to be working alongside with Talk Out. And Becky's absolutely right. We have got some great partnerships with the ABM community, Facilities Aviation. It's been absolutely outstanding. But before I became a mental health first aid instructor and lived in the world with mental health and wellbeing, I was also a firefighter. I was also a security professional. I was also a nurse, a doctor. I was also a diffusion. I was a bomb specialist. I've been many things in my 46 years on this earth. And the reason why I was is because I was a cabin crew member. So we are trained in every, see Damien? Yeah, every eventuality. You think, I've been there, done it, got the t-shirt, wear it, tattoo, you name it. So for the trolley dollies that are out there, actually, and we do pick our nose in the car on the way home. We're not going to lie, it's been a 17-hour shift. We've been on an aeroplane. But within the industry of aviation, we are trained for any eventuality where our adrenaline can literally go from 0 to 1,000, depending on the situation that we're dealt with, whether it's an oven fire or it's an emergency landing into Bordeaux, which I've had twice. Also, we have had repatriation flights from terrorism attacks, so Morocco, Tunisia, and then Sharm el-Sheikh. So cabin crew actually are worth the wait, to be totally honest with you. My mental health, so I live with mental ill health with stress and anxiety disorder, and my mental health was impacted back in 2001 when September the 11th had the catastrophic event of the Twin Towers being attacked in the terrorist attack that was September the 11th. So that wasn't the uniform back then. However, I didn't do anything about my mental health and welfare back then. I didn't have the support that was needed mentally. We didn't know what to do in that situation. And actually, because I didn't have that support moving forward 12, 15 years, I realised that my mental health was really impacted on a daily basis. And so it was then that I realised that once we understand we need help and support, that's when we should seek it, because we carry that and eventually it will come back and haunt us. So we do really need to look after our own mental health. So just some stats, and I know like Paul's already mentioned this, we do see this a lot. We do talk about it an awful lot. We talk about this in a way that these statistics and this data is very commercial. We look at this in a different way, cost savings. But actually what we need to look at is the fact that this is getting closer and closer to home, guys. It's not just, oh, there's a guy who knows my dad that goes to the pub. This actually could be a member of your household now. So much so, particularly with COVID and the layered approach that's affecting individuals daily now. We don't even know the impact of COVID yet from a mental health perspective. We've no idea what that looks like. What we do know is that the risk factors that are attached to people completing suicide have been exacerbated due to the fact that there's a lot of isolation, job loss, bereavement. We've had furlough, which is fantastic. When that scheme comes to the end, you know, we've got that impact as well. I won't talk through the stats because I haven't got enough time, but we do have this presentation available for you as well with the recording. We're also on the cards, thank goodness, for the Bill of Parliament. Hopefully the Act will be passed, fingers crossed, that there should be mental health first aiders in every organisation, similarly to physical first aiders. You know, we're looking at 1 to 25 ratio, guys, so it's the importance is absolutely key. And it's that person that you can reach out to when you are seeking support from a mental health perspective. The programme that we run alongside other mental health awareness programmes and line manager training with myself and Nat, we are running the mental health first aid adult programme, which is, Becky had already mentioned, we're working alongside ABM and the guys. The programme itself is really, really effective, very, very important. We've got 4 sessions that we run together, and at the end of the sessions you become a certified mental health first aider. So that's a 3-yearly programme. You refresh every 3 years, similarly to physical first aid as well. We do it online, we do it with 4 half-day sessions with individual learning in between, which look a little bit like this. So session 1, we look at mental health first aid. We look at the introduction of an action plan. We talk about stigma, we talk about the frame of reference, everyone's different, you know, non-judgmental listening, how that's applied within the process. Session 2, we look at suicide and depression. There's always assessments in every session, so we look at case studies, we talk through lived experience. The team that is brought together as mental health first aid aiders on day 1 become each other's confidant. So the 16 people or 12 people or whoever's on that course become each other's backbone and support. Session 3, we look at anxiety disorders, self-harm, and we look at eating disorders. And when we talk about the examples, we can see it is very, very much close to home. And you only need to look in, you know, in the news and social media to see how people have been impacted within this arena. And then finally, we look at psychosis, and then we pull it all together and we have a full assessment with everybody, looking at different case studies under different disorders. You're not trained to be a clinician. You're certainly not trained to know everything or make all the answers. You're trained to be intervention. So it's in a really important position to be. You are the person that is the person that looks after someone and then supporting them into another encouraging, whether that be professional or other help. So we catch and we pass that person forward. It's one of the best programs I've ever run. So we look at some of the data we've got. Even before COVID-19, there was growing mental health crisis issues in the UK. But we talking about mental health, become much more common. We've got more people talk openly about it, whether that's because we're going to talk about this in a second, but is it a trend or is it actually people wanting to share how they're feeling? Within the business, we look at raising awareness, reducing stigma, and helping someone in crisis. And guys, when we talk about crisis, we're talking about someone who is wanting to harm themselves or someone else. That's when it becomes a crisis, and that's when we call for professional help. Intervention is key, and intervention is key for everything, isn't it, when it comes to education and learning, particularly in the world of mental health awareness. So that's pretty much it in a nutshell, the 5 minutes I had, but please reach out to me anytime. The programme that we run, we don't just run as a training programme, it's a partnership, and once the training ends, we still are there to support you on your along the way with the mental health journey that we've started with you guys. So yeah, that's it in a nutshell for you all.
Thanks, Leanne. That's really
welcome.
I found myself thinking, I did actually envisage a whole future world there where there was a mental health first aider in every company, in the same way that there is a fire warden and a first aider. And I'm thinking what a great space it would be to transition into that, but not have it too far in the future. So I guess as leaders and influencers in our own sectors and our industry, we have the opportunity to push those ideas forward now so that we can get ahead and not just follow a trend, because I can see it happening. Let's be a part of that early energy and advocate for it in our own environments. Okay.
And encourage that culture piece as well with Paul. What Paul was saying earlier on, Yolanda, it has to be a culture shift. So it's about creating that culture change and have these elements as the tools in the back pocket to help support.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got a question here that's very relevant. There's a view coming over to Paul first that it's somewhat trendy at the moment to sort of come out and say you have a mental health problem with the sort of social media, social influences. You know, it's digging up a lot of skepticism, which is a bit mean, to be honest, to suggest that there's a trend of coming out and saying you have mental health. So what would you say about that, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those where there's obviously a concern, especially within organizations, of when is it going to be used as an advantage. So when is someone going to just say, oh, I'm struggling with my mental health just to, get a week off work or whatever it is. And that's definitely the concern. However, we all have mental health, right? So everyone has mental health. There's no denying that. That's straight up fact that we all have physical health. We all have mental health. So if more people are talking about their mental health, it will encourage more people to come out, a celebrity or whoever, and talk quite openly about it. So there's going to be a rise in people talking more openly about mental health, which is all I'm concerned about. I'm not concerned about the people coming out. I'm more concerned about the people suffering in silence, right? And the people that aren't talking about it, the people that feel like they can't talk about it, you know, my dad, who suffered in silence obviously for so long, you know, when I was struggling, you know, didn't want to talk to anyone about it. That's the reality of it. And I'm more worried for them. I'm more concerned about them than the people coming out and it becoming this trend. So yeah, there's hesitation from a lot of people, but I think we need to push through that, because the more people that talk openly about mental health, then the better.
Oh, Yolanda, you're on mute.
You're on mute. You're just complimenting that answer, wasn't you?
So coming over to you, Leanne, what's your view around how it's viewed skeptically that, you know, people are just coming out because it's trendy to do so?
So I just completely believe there's a lot of education needed. People are still stuck in the ways where they think that having, I don't know, I remember hearing someone say they're using the mental health card. It astounds me still, and just to, so Damien talked about lived experience with my mental ill health. I don't want to be off work. I don't want to be away from an environment that loves me. You know, I want to feel valued. I want to have a purpose and a goal. I want to be able to come to work every day, albeit maybe not firing on full cylinders, but with people around me who are going to support me through this period. Being on your own in the house or whatever, or taking a week off work at that time, it was not good for me mentally. So I think we have to realise that actually with the right adjustments and the right support in place, and the empathy and the compassion and the talking and the listening, you know, there won't be a trend. It will be an everyday practice, and I think that's really important.
And coming over to you, really, what's your view, Damien, around this criticism of the trend of coming out with mental health illness? It demeans the people who have real issues, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It's like anything. You need to take it in the context in which it's said and the individual who says it. But just to echo what Leanne said there, the last thing somebody with some type of suffering mentally wants to be is at home on their own, out of the workplace, because then they're left with their thoughts. They're left with this increasing negativity that may be created for them, or they could be creating themselves. So yeah, I think case by case it needs to be looked at individually and taken into context, you know, because I'm sure there is people out there who maybe say they're suffering or use a mental health illness to get off work. Maybe there is. I don't know. I haven't came across any, but maybe there is. And they're taken away from the people who actually do have probably mental health problems or aren't feeling great. And then when they're looking at other work colleagues going, oh, he pulled or she pulled the mental health card, that's gonna limit them coming forward. So I think the educational piece absolutely needs to be there, that where members of staff can say, right, I'm gonna go in and speak to my manager, supervisor, or my work colleague, tell them about my difficulties without any type of reprisal happening for them, that they'll just go, yeah. And as Leanne said as well, if you can go to work and people know, okay, they're not firing 100% today, they're at 80%. So at tea time, I'm just going to have a chat and see if everything's okay. And it could be a case where they're just not feeling it today. It's not actually a massive mental health problem where you need to go over and do interventions. It could be a case where they just want to be left alone. They're having other issues they're trying to figure out at home, maybe paying a bill, maybe doing whatever. It's not actually a crisis, as was mentioned, the word was mentioned earlier. So I think, to wrap it up, context, for me it's context. Depending on the context, would really dictate the stigma associated with it.
Damien, that's incredibly eloquent. Thank you very much. Becky, what's your view about, you know, this skepticism around coming out as having a mental health problem because it's trendy?
So I don't really agree with that. However, I just think it's recognised more in this day and age. So therefore, you know, it is talked about more. Probably my controversial side is the celebrity side. I agree with people talking about it, making it open and for people to understand it more. But I do think that maybe like celebrity magazines and all that, they don't help the situation sometimes with making it into a trendy thing, because you'll always get the followers who want to be like their celebrity idols and things like that, and then they don't really understand the full understanding of what mental health is and things like that. So that's maybe my controversial side of it, but I do think that the truth of it is that people talk about mental health more nowadays. And if we had more things like this on TV, more discussions, things like that, people might understand what mental health is, how it affects people, so that people can understand that if you really are suffering with mental health, it's not something that you want to talk about all the time, and you don't want your life to be ruled by that mental health, you know, and you don't want people to look at you and go, that's Becky, she's got mental health. But I want people to look at me and go, that's Becky, she's doing brilliant. She's got a few issues, but we're helping support her through that. And I think if things like that were more available for people to understand, then less people would say it if they maybe don't have it.
Thank you, Becky. Awesome. So look, I'm going to come to Nick in a minute. Nicholas Reed is also on the IFPO advisory board. He's going to be talking about Being Human, which is one of our collaborative projects about literally putting words into action. Before we come over to Nick, we've got a question from one of our panelists who says, and so if you could make your response fairly brief, what do the panelists think are the main challenges for facing frontline security officers that are relative to their own mental health? So we'll start off with you, Paul, specifically around the sort of, you know, the frontline worker. What do you think are the main challenges?
So are they asking, just to give me some context in terms of how the frontline worker manages their own mental health?
Yes. What do the panelists think are the main challenges facing frontline security officers are relative to their own mental health? So I guess really one of the leading areas would be the isolation part of working alone a lot.
Yeah, I mean, again, this isn't definitely my expertise, so I'll keep this short because I'm sure the others will weigh in a lot better. But I think, as you say, that isolation, probably with frontline, it's not feeling connected, and it's probably a role that you feel like you can't really talk about your mental health, which makes it even more difficult. And it's also probably supporting others where, you know, we're setting ourselves on fire to keep others warm. So definitely like prioritizing your own mental health if you're on that frontline service. However, I want to hear what the others say because they're more equipped and experienced than I am on this one.
Yeah, coming over to Leanne then quickly.
No, yeah, very quickly. I think Paul's absolutely right. There is an isolation piece there, isn't there? But also, like Becky said, she's frontline. She's probably going to be the first person to an incident, the first responder possibly. And then what happens then? So who looks after Becky? Looking after the person who's in crisis. So it's about making sure that everybody's supported within the community, and I mean from the top down and bottom up, everybody. Yeah,
Damien.
I think it's a great question. What I will say is the main challenge that the frontline security officer has is the fact that they're going to possibly be on a post on their own, and most likely in the night time. Like if you're in retail, you're going to be looking at customers coming in and out. You might not get the chance to be left with your thoughts, but definitely looking at the nighttime security operative. And I think they have a massive challenge being on their own at night time, left with their thoughts. But that then throws it back to us as managers, supervisors, to realise that, and then to reach out at night time in the ungodly hours of 2, 3, 4, 5 o'clock in the morning. What's the harm in ringing them and seeing, just checking in with you, how's everything okay? A 10-20 minute phone call. How valued would an employee feel if the manager was to ring them at that hour of the morning to say, not only are you up, but I'm up to make sure you're all right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, sounds perfect.
Very much so. In fact, you know, I am aware that specifically around Christmas time, when there's a lot more isolation, security officers have a lot less visibility to management. You know, a lot of companies now really do strongly advocate the senior management team going out and meeting them and seeing them and taking them some biscuits and things like that. I think I think we're getting better at that. But Becky, I think you're probably the best place to talk about frontline security officers and the kind of factors that affect their mental health in the front line.
Yeah, I mean, obviously every incident affects everyone differently. And from my own personal, when we've had incidents, I find that it's best that as a manager, I always do welfare calls with them straight after. I get them in, talk to them, make sure that they're okay. But ABM are a great company as well. We have something called Perk Box, and it's a 24-hour counselling line that we put all our guys to if they want to talk to anyone 24/7. You know, it is about the talking, and you know, and some of them just want to discuss what's happened. Some of them I need to call for a few days after just to keep checking in on them. Some of them, they seem all right. You know, they do the same with me if I've been involved in the incidents. I mean, we're quite lucky. We do always have a controller in, and we always have then a guard in. So we have two people that can talk to each other at night time. So although they're essentially lone working out in the area and they might have to go to an incident on their own, they will always have someone to go back to. They always know I'm at the end of the line, so they'll call me if any incident happens, whatever time of the night, so I'll discuss with them. So yeah, I mean, it is about the talking, the being there, and then once again, it's the training on how to deal with events and how to deal with your emotions after the event.
Notwithstanding, you just add COVID on top of all of that. And then you've got an even greater issue that we all need to be aware of. Okay, so coming over to Nicholas Reed now. Nicholas, I'm going to let you introduce yourself because only you can do that in that sort of suave and sophisticated way that you do.
You mean whilst sat in a car in a service station?
Yeah.
My name's Nicholas Reed. I've been in the security industry for a little over 20 years now. Spent the last 8.5 working in the healthcare sector. For my sins, I sit on the advisory board for IFPO UK. And as Yolanda has already referenced, one of the projects we've been involved in is developing a training course to address many of the things that we've been discussing today. The course itself is called Being Human, and it's been developed in collaboration with specialist training providers Ethos Farm. And Being Human isn't a one-off training course. It's actually a series of mini courses or modules that build upon each other, consolidating in a progressive educational and development series that's been broken into manageable steps and themed around specific topics. They're suitable for everyone across the security industry at all levels, and can either take all of the modules, or people can select the relevant ones of interest or specific need to them. As you progress through the modules, they become progressively more specialised, looking at some of the individual themes we've talked about during this webinar. And overall, they explore the concepts of mental health and well-being, but delivered in a very approachable, understandable, memorable, but above all, usable set of tools through a series of lessons. And most importantly and relevant for this webinar, they've been specifically written for security professionals, taking into account the areas we work, the varied situations we find ourselves in. Module 1 of the course is just about to be released, and it's actually called Being Human, Behavioural Awareness. It should take less than an hour to complete, and it introduces and starts to address some of the range of behaviours that security professionals may witness or even experience themselves in their roles. But it explores the underlying causes to those behaviours, whether they be mental health, physical health, fear, such as through control and coercion. It explores neurodiversity, the impacts of drugs and alcohol, and also broader issues that we've mentioned, like the pandemic or national depressions, as in the financial type, the economic impacts on people. And it's relevant whether these security professionals are dealing with the public, dealing with their clients, their colleagues, their families at home, or even themselves. I'm hoping my background noise isn't intervening, so I'm going to plough on regardless of, thank you for the shakes of the head. The course focuses rather on second guessing or attempting to diagnose each person that we encounter. It's focused on treating them as individuals in their own right and in their own circumstance, hence the name. It's about being human. And the purpose of the course, or in this first module, is to deliver the initial takeaway tool to help security professionals with such encounters. And this is called the human tool. Overall, as I've said, the course will build upon this initial encounter. Sorry, I'm slightly distracted by what's going on right outside my window, but I'll come back to that. It builds up on what is going on in their initial encounter, and it draws upon a lot of the principles in mental health first aid, in suicide intervention, from employee assistance programs, and from sector experts and consultants. But above all, it draws on real lived experiences from security professionals. So it takes the material that might form clinical psychologist or counselling courses and simplifies the complex ideas and breaks them down into usable and digestible tools and segments that can be taken away and applied to real security situations. Each of the modules themselves will, upon successful completion, will carry a certificate to be recognised as part of continuous professional development. And the concept of the course is that it will build upon each module in a layered fashion and provide a very comprehensive range of mental health and well-being tools and understanding for security professionals in their deployments. Thank you.
Thank you, Nick. That's awesome. And thanks for obviously being very patient and waiting in your car as well, and for giving us that amazing content. Okay, so we really do feel like we're right up against the clock now. We've got 2 minutes left. I'm just going to come to each of you first, Paul, and then Leanne, just to give, I don't know, maybe one idea, one suggestion that you think you would like to share with everybody. Mine, for example, would be about prioritizing my time so that I don't feel guilty for missing someone out, that I actually do readdress my priorities and I'm not too selfish with my own time when I know there are other needy people. That's something I'm going to take away. Paul, over to you for a quick 30 seconds.
I think, you know, the human element to mental health doesn't go away no matter what industry you're in, right? So I, you know, obviously haven't got a lot of experience in security, but like Damien said and Becky said, it's checking in with others. It's just simple human, you know, tasks that all of us can do, and that's equivalent to co-op retail staff. You know, it's equivalent to someone who works in tech. You know, just being human is kind of the message that I'd like to share. So yeah, very insightful discussion. Thank you for having me. But yeah, be more human is, I guess, is the takeaway for me.
Awesome. Leanne, over to you.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you, Yolanda, taking time for others. But I also, and we talk about this in the training, is that we talk about putting our own oxygen mask on first before we can help anyone else. So I think it's important to make sure that we practice our own personal self-care. If I don't practice my self-care, I'm not well. So therefore, I can't help anyone. So make sure that we look after ourselves.
Great point there, Damien. And what would be your tip or advice?
I suppose, Yolanda, this is, there's no one tool fixes all here for this one. I think the main thing for this is continuous education, continuous awareness, and for the industry is to have open lines of communication without reprisal for any staff member, top, bottom, or bottom up. You know, it's to have that open lines of communication, that it's not going to be used in a malicious way against the individual if they do come out with some of their feelings. So it's communication for me, because that would probably be the cause of it. Communication.
Thank you, Damien. And before we sign off, last but not least, Becky.
Yeah, communication, talking, and hear people. Don't just listen, hear them and take on what they actually say, react to what they say. So yeah, that communication, again, it's got to be the key for the future.
So thank you, everybody. It's been an absolute pleasure to host this webinar and talking about Security Minds Matters. Danny, we've got a slide that has a link for anybody who's interested. Martin Gill asked us to just give a nudge to his thought leadership webinar coming up on Tuesday, the 4th of May. I know many of you probably are aware of his amazing webinars. Anyway, this one is a very special one, 3:30 on Tuesday, because all the panelists are international IFPO members including myself. I just can't get enough. Anyway, thank you so much. Good mental health, stay positive, and enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you, everybody.
Cheers, guys.
Thanks, everybody.